15 days before my wedding, my parents looked my fiancé in the eye and told him I had abandoned my own baby because I didn't even know who her father was. They thought that lie would end my marriage before it began. They never imagined DNA had already proved my fiancé was my daughter's biological father, or that the little girl they stole from my life 7 years earlier was about to walk into our rehearsal dinner. My name is Ione Whitaker, and this is how the people who claimed they were protecting me spent years destroying every choice I ever tried to make. Chapter 1. The Daughter They Said I Threw Away. 15 days before my wedding, my father invited my fiancé and me to dinner so he could tell Callum that I had abandoned my daughter. The table was set with the china my mother only used on Thanksgiving. 4 plates, 4 folded napkins, 4 glasses of water, lined up so precisely that the entire room felt staged. There were no flowers for the wedding, no engagement photo on the mantel, nothing that suggested Vivian and Graham Whitaker were preparing to celebrate their only daughter. I knew before I sat down that this was not reconciliation. My fingers went cold, my breathing shortened, my eyes found the front door without permission. I was 28 years old. I had a nursing degree and my own apartment in Cambridge and a job caring for sick children at Boston Children's Hospital. But inside that house in Wellesley, part of me still became the 20-year-old girl who had been taught that disagreeing with her parents was proof that she was unstable. Callum noticed. He always did. He sat beside me and rested his hand near mine, close enough that I could reach for him without anyone else seeing. My father began with a prayer. He spoke longer than usual, emphasizing honesty, purity, and accountability, as if each word had been selected for a specific target. When he finished, Vivian passed the roasted carrots and asked Callum about work at Reed and Hale Architecture. She smiled while he answered, but her eyes kept moving toward me. Graham waited until everyone had food on their plates, then he put down his fork. "Callum," he said, "there is something you need to know before you marry our daughter." My stomach tightened. "Dad," I said. He lifted one hand without looking at me. "Let me finish." Vivian folded her napkin in her lap. Callum stayed still. Graham leaned back in his chair and spoke as if he were giving a responsible man unfortunate financial advice. Ione became pregnant when she was very young. She was not certain who the father was. She tried to convince one young man to stay with her, and when that did not work, she gave the child away and continued with her life. Every sentence was built from a fragment of truth and wrapped around a lie. Vivian sighed softly. Ione has always rewritten the past when the truth makes her uncomfortable. Marriage cannot survive secrets. You deserve to know that she abandoned a baby and never looked back. I stared at the grain of the dining table. "Sit down, stop being dramatic, the adults are talking." I heard those old commands as clearly as if Vivian had spoken them again. I did not answer immediately. That silence was not guilt. It was a survival response. For years, every protest I made had been used against me. If I cried, I was irrational. If I raised my voice, I was unstable. If I stayed calm, they said I clearly did not care. Under the table, Callum took my hand. He did not ask if their story was true. He looked directly at my father. "I know Ione had a daughter." Vivian's expression changed first. Her mouth remained composed, but the confidence left her eyes. Graham recovered faster. "Then you should also know she never established who the father was. There were questions about several people." Callum's grip tightened around my hand. "Are you sure that is what she believed," he asked, "or what you needed her to believe?" Neither of them answered. That question struck the part of the past they had spent years trying to bury. Callum and I met in 2013 when I was 17 and he was 19. He was preparing to start architecture school at MIT, and I found him in the library drawing a house instead of studying for a physics exam. It had a wide front porch, tall windows, and a small room facing east. I asked why that room needed so many windows. He told me morning light made a house feel like a real family lived inside it. He gave me the drawing on my 18th birthday. My mother disliked him almost immediately. Callum encouraged me to choose my own major and apply for summer programs outside Massachusetts. Vivian called that influence. Graham called it distraction. He never openly insulted Callum. He simply reminded me that my parents had paid for private school college applications and every opportunity I had. "Do not throw away your future for a teenage relationship," he would say. By late 2016, Callum and I were struggling. He was buried in studio work. I was at Boston College trying to meet every expectation my parents had placed on me. Vivian called constantly and questioned every hour I spent away from campus. Callum and I argued. We went several weeks without seeing each other, but we had not ended things. One cold evening in November, we met near the Charles River and talked until the streetlights came on. We apologized. We promised to stop letting other people speak for us. A few weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant. I took 3 tests in the bathroom of my dorm. All 3 were positive. I wanted to call Callum. I even opened his contact, but fear won. I went home and told my mother first because some part of me still believed a mother would help her frightened daughter think clearly. Vivian looked at the tests on the bathroom counter. She did not ask if I was all right. She asked who knew. When I said no one, relief crossed her face. "Then we still have time to handle this privately," she said. I told her I would not end the pregnancy. She did not argue immediately. She changed tactics. Within 2 days, she was discussing adoption. Graham approached the situation like a contract. If I kept the baby, they would stop paying tuition. The car was in their name, so they would take it back. I could not remain in their house. They would not pay medical bills, rent, childcare, or food. He never raised his voice. That made it worse. He listed the ways they could make survival impossible and called it letting me understand reality. Vivian took my phone because she said stress was dangerous for the baby. She used my email to send Callum a message ending our relationship. He called repeatedly. My father answered once and told him I did not want contact. When I tried to use the landline, Vivian pulled the cord from the wall. "If Callum knows," she said, "he will make everything harder. Someday you will understand that we are saving your future." Then she began attacking my memory. She said the dates did not fit Callum. She mentioned Andrew Cole, a man I had met for coffee once during the weeks Callum and I were arguing. Nothing had happened with Andrew. I told her that every time. Vivian repeated the name anyway. She said Callum would demand a test, deny the baby, and humiliate me publicly. She said no respectable family would survive that kind of scandal. Weeks of isolation, fear, and dependence did what she intended. I began doubting facts I had once known. Then one night I went downstairs for water and heard my parents arguing in the kitchen. Graham sounded worried. "What happens if Callum finds out and wants to keep the child?" he asked. Vivian answered without hesitation. "Then he cannot find out until there is nothing left for him to stop." I stood in the dark hallway with one hand over my stomach. They had never truly believed Callum could not be the father. They were afraid he was. I returned to my room, closed the door, and pressed both hands against the small curve of my belly. I told my baby I was sorry. My parents were not helping me make a choice. They were removing every person who might help me choose differently before any of us understood that we needed to fight. Chapter 2. 90 Seconds and 7 Unsent Birthdays. By the time summer arrived, my world had narrowed to my parents' house in Wellesley, a bedroom at the end of the hall, and a future everyone discussed as if I were not in the room. Vivian told people at Grace Community Church that I had taken medical leave from college and needed privacy. She said it with the careful concern of a mother protecting a fragile daughter. No one knew I was pregnant. No one knew my phone had been taken. No one knew every ride, appointment, and conversation depended on my parents' permission. Graham kept paying the fee that held my place at Boston College. He mentioned it whenever I questioned the adoption plan. "We are preserving your options," he would say. What he meant was that my options belonged to him. The adoption agency sent a case manager named Helen Avery to meet us in the living room. She carried a leather folder and spoke in a calm, practiced voice. She explained that the arrangement being considered was semi-open. The adoptive parents could send photographs and letters through the agency. We would not exchange addresses or direct contact information, but I could receive updates as my child grew. I leaned forward. "I want that." Vivian answered before Helen could respond. "Ione is overwhelmed. She may feel differently once she has had time to heal." I looked at Helen. "I will not feel differently." Helen wrote something in her notes. For 1 second, I thought she might ask my parents to leave the room. She did not. She explained the process again and asked whether I understood that the adoptive parents would become the legal parents. I said I understood the words. That was not the same as accepting the life they described. Vivian smiled at Helen and said we were grateful for her guidance. The meeting ended with everyone acting as if a decision had been reached fairly. No one asked what fairness looked like when one person could lose housing, tuition, transportation, and family support by saying no. On August 13, 2017, after 16 hours of labor at Newton Wellesley Hospital, my daughter was born at 3:42 in the morning. She weighed 6 pounds, 8 ounces. She had dark, soft hair and long fingers that opened and closed against the hospital blanket. On her left shoulder was a small, crescent-shaped birthmark. I saw it from across the room before anyone let me touch her. My mother had already reminded the nurses that an adoption had been arranged. She said too much bonding would make the transition harder for whom she never said. A maternity nurse named Elena Ruiz watched me asking to hold my baby for the 3rd time. She looked at the chart, then at Vivian, then back at me. Finally, Elena lifted my daughter and placed her against my chest. I did not know I would have only 90 seconds. I felt the weight of her first. She was lighter than I had imagined and somehow heavier than anything I had ever carried. Her cheek rested against my skin. Her breath came in quick, warm bursts. She smelled like clean cloth and something sweet I could never name afterward. Her fingers closed around one of mine. I looked at the crescent on her shoulder and tried to memorize its exact shape. "I wanted you," I whispered. "Please remember that somehow." My mother stepped closer. "That is enough," Elena hesitated. Vivian repeated herself. My daughter was lifted from my chest before I understood that the moment was ending. I reached after her without thinking. My arms closed around empty air. Later, when the room was quiet and Vivian had gone to speak with someone from the agency, Elena returned near the end of her shift. She placed my folded clothes on the chair beside the bed. Inside the bag beneath my sweater, she had hidden a small Polaroid. My daughter was wrapped in a white hospital blanket. Her face was turned slightly toward the camera. One hand was visible near her chin. Elena did not say what she had done. She only squeezed my shoulder. Years later, I learned she had written in my nursing notes that I was distressed, that I repeatedly requested more time with my infant, and that I asked more than once about future contact. Those notes could not reverse an adoption. They could not return a child. But they meant someone had seen me trying. The next day, Helen Avery returned with the consent forms. Vivian stood behind my chair. Graham sat near the door, staring at his shoes. I asked Helen again whether the adoptive family would send pictures. They have agreed to send regular updates through the agency. And letters, yes. The contact address listed on the paperwork was my parents' house because I had nowhere else to receive mail. Vivian rested one hand on my shoulder. "I will keep everything safe until you are ready," I signed. For years I blamed myself for that signature. I had been 20. I could read. I understood what the papers said. That made me believe I had no right to describe what happened as anything except my own choice. It took therapy to teach me that a signature can be legally valid while the person holding the pen is terrified, isolated, and being told she will lose every form of support if she refuses. Within a week of my returning home, Vivian removed everything connected to the pregnancy from my bedroom. The maternity clothes disappeared, the bottle samples were thrown away, even the hospital bracelet vanished from the nightstand. She said keeping those things would trap me in grief. At night, I woke believing I heard a baby crying somewhere in the house. There was never a baby, only the refrigerator humming downstairs and the sound of my parents sleeping peacefully. I began therapy before the end of 2017. My therapist used words like coercion trauma and disenfranchised grief. I listened, but I could not fully accept them. I had signed. That fact became a wall I built around my own pain. In 2018, I left Boston College and enrolled at Simmons University School of Nursing. I did not become a pediatric nurse because I wanted to punish myself. I chose it because I was good at noticing fear before children knew how to name it. I knew what it looked like when someone went quiet because adults had taken control of the room. I graduated in May 2021 and started at Boston Children's Hospital the following month. That was where I met Maya Chen. She was the first friend I told that every August 13th I asked for the day off. On Elodie's 7th birthday, Maya found me sitting in my car after an evening shift with a blank card resting against the steering wheel. I had never spoken my daughter's name because I did not know it then. I only called her my baby. Maya sat in the passenger seat without asking permission. "Who is the card for?" "My daughter." She did not ask why I had never mentioned a daughter before. She waited. I told her I had written one card every year and never sent any of them. In the first, I wrote that I did not know whether she had learned to walk. In the fifth, I asked if she had been afraid on her first day of school. In the seventh, I wrote that I would not search for her if my presence might damage the family raising her, but I begged her on paper she might never see to believe she had never been forgotten. The 7 cards stayed in a box with the Polaroid and Callum's drawing of the house with the east-facing room. Then, on March 15, 2022, Callum walked back into my life. Reed and Hale Architecture had been hired to help redesign part of the pediatric wing. I was reviewing discharge instructions at the nurse's station when I heard his voice behind me. I turned. He looked older, sharper around the face, but I knew him immediately. My first feeling was not love, it was fear. Callum belonged to the part of my life my parents had trained me to avoid. After my shift, we sat in the hospital cafe. He asked why I disappeared. I told him about the email and the phone calls. He said he had gone to my parents' house. Graham told him I did not want to see him. Then I told him I had been pregnant. I told him I gave birth to a girl and signed adoption papers. Callum went very still. He did not ask why I had not fought harder. He did not ask why I had not found him. He asked if I had been safe. The question broke something open in me. We rebuilt slowly. Months of coffee became dinners. Dinners became long conversations. In November, Callum joined me in couples therapy with Dr. Naomi Pierce. I admitted there was a chance Elodie was his daughter. I also admitted I no longer trusted my own memory of the conception timeline. On December 20, 2023, Callum proposed on the roof of my Cambridge apartment. I said yes, then told him that if we ever searched for Elodie, it could not be about fixing us. We would not challenge her adoption, we would not follow her, contact her school, or appear at her home. Callum agreed. In January 2024, we both took DNA tests and allowed relative matching. For 8 months, nothing appeared. Then, on September 3, after I finished a late shift, Callum called. "Sit down," he said. His account showed a parent-child match. Elodie W. Minor, account managed by Nora Walsh. For the first time in 7 years, my daughter had a name. She had a family. She had a life that had continued without me. Callum's voice shook when he spoke again. I think the door we thought was closed just opened. Chapter 3. The letters my mother never let me read. Hope was not the first thing I felt. Fear came first. The match could be wrong. Nora Walsh could think Callum and I were trying to take Elodie away. Elodie might not want to know us. Worse, I might be searching for her because I needed relief from my own guilt, not because knowing me would make her life better. Callum wanted to know where she lived, but he did not search for an address or school. The next morning we called Rebecca Sloan, a family law attorney who specialized in adoption reunification. Her rules were immediate and clear. No searching school records, no driving by addresses, no contacting relatives through social media, no surprises. Callum nodded even though she could not see him through the phone. We understand. Rebecca continued, "You are not her legal parents. A biological match does not alter the adoption. Any contact must begin with the Walsh family, and they have the right to say no." I needed to hear that. Not because I wanted to challenge them, but because I needed the line between hope and entitlement drawn clearly. Rebecca sent a short message through the DNA platform, then followed it with a formal letter. It said Callum and I were not contesting the adoption. We wanted to verify the relationship. We would respect every boundary set by Nora Daniel and their therapist. If they believed contact would harm Elodie, we would not approach her. For 6 days, there was no answer. On the 7th, Nora Walsh replied. She was 43 and worked as a pediatrician in Brookline. Daniel was 45 and taught history at a public high school. They had always told Elodie she was adopted, but they had not expected her biological father to appear through a DNA database when she was 7. Nora later told me her first reaction had been panic. She imagined lawyers' custody hearings and strangers appearing outside Elodie's school. Daniel was calmer, but he agreed they needed professional guidance before responding. They spoke with Dr. Naomi Pierce, who already understood my history from therapy sessions with Callum and me. Naomi made it clear that her first responsibility in the reunion process would be Elodie. The Walshes agreed to one video call between the adults. Nora appeared on screen sitting at a kitchen table. Daniel sat beside her with his hands folded. Callum and I were in our apartment close enough that our shoulders touched. Nora spoke first. "What are you asking us for?" The directness of the question helped. "I'm not asking to become the center of her life," I said. "I'm asking whether there might be room for the truth." Nora's expression changed slightly. Callum explained that we would not challenge the adoption or demand a parental role. Daniel asked practical questions about privacy, the wedding, and whether my parents knew. "They don't know," I said. "Not yet." The Walshes agreed to independent testing through an accredited laboratory. The results confirmed Callum as Elodie's biological father with a probability above 99.9%. My own test confirmed the maternal relationship. Rebecca reminded all of us that the results did not change custody, adoption status, or legal parentage. Nora and Daniel were Elodie's parents. Knowing the truth did not erase the life they had built with her. While we waited for Dr. Naomi to decide how to speak with Elodie, Rebecca contacted Helen Avery at the adoption agency. Helen still worked there. She remembered my file. What she found changed the shape of every year I had spent believing silence was part of the agreement. The Walshes had sent 7 update packages. There was a photograph from 6 months, a letter from Elodie's first birthday, a picture from her first day of preschool, a drawing, a note from Nora saying Elodie loved purple and music, a photograph from kindergarten, a copy of the program from her first violin recital. 2 early packages had been marked delivered to my parents' house in Wellesley. Then the file changed. An email from my old address requested that all future contacts stop because the birth mother needed a clean break. Helen had no record of speaking directly to me. The confirmation call had gone to the Whitaker house. The person who answered identified herself as my mother and said I was too emotionally unstable to receive future updates. By then, I no longer lived in Wellesley. I was at Simmons working part-time and rebuilding a life my parents no longer controlled every hour of. Still, someone used my name to close the only door the adoption had left open. Rebecca offered to send the complete file. I could not look at it yet. "Read me the labels," I said. She read them one by one. 6 months, first birthday, first day of preschool, purple dress, family drawing, kindergarten morning, first violin recital. When Rebecca reached the kindergarten package, I remembered the card in my box. I had written that year that I wondered whether Elodie had been scared on her first day of school. Nora's letter said Elodie had held her hands so tightly outside the classroom that both their palms were damp. Nora and I had thought about the same child on the same morning. She had tried to tell me. I had tried to speak to a daughter whose address I did not know. Vivian had made both of us believe the other woman wanted silence. Callum stood and began pacing. "We confront them now." "No," he stopped. "Ione, they stole 7 years, I know." My voice cracked, but I kept going. "Elodie comes first, not Vivian, not revenge. Elodie." Callum sat down again. "You're right. Dr. Naomi spoke with Elodie over several sessions. Elodie asked whether we wanted to meet her. She asked whether we planned to take her away. She asked if Nora and Daniel would still be her mom and dad. They told her the adoption would not change. Her home would remain her home. Meeting us would happen only if she wanted it. She wanted it. The first meeting was set for February 14, 2025, at the Walsh home in Brookline. Elodie wore a purple dress. She did not run toward me or hide. She stood close to Nora and studied my face. "Are you Ione?" "Yes." She nodded, then looked at Callum. "And you're Callum?" "I am." She carried a handmade photo album to the coffee table. On the cover, in uneven block letters, she had written, "The years before we met." She showed us birthdays, school pictures, a cast from when she broke her wrist at 6, and her first violin performance. I forced myself not to cry so hard that she would need to comfort me. Those memories belonged to her. My grief did not get to take over the room. Halfway through the album, Elodie closed it. "Did you want me?" The question was quiet. "Yes," I said. "I wanted you. I was young and scared, and the adults around me made decisions I did not know how to stop. None of it was because of you." She looked toward Nora. "Are you going to take me away from Mom and Dad?" "No. Your home is your home. We hope there might be room to know you. We are not here to replace anyone." Nora lowered her eyes for a moment, and when she looked back, some of the fear in her face was gone. Elodie brought out a drawing. It showed Nora Daniel and herself standing in front of a yellow house. At the edge of the page were two figures without faces. "I didn't know where to put you," she said. "I thought Mom might be sad." Nora picked up a purple pencil. "A family can have more people without anyone being erased." Elodie added dark hair to my figure and made Callum much taller than everyone else. She wrote our names beneath us. Ione, Callum. Not Mom or Dad. That was enough. Over the next several weeks, we kept the visits simple. Elodie showed us the Museum of Science as if she personally owned every exhibit. Later, we listened to her practice violin in the Walsh living room. She played the same passage 3 times, frowning each time she missed one note. When she finally got it right, she looked at all 4 adults to make sure we had heard. That night, she could not sleep. She asked Nora whether liking me meant she was betraying her. Nora told her love was not a pie that became smaller when more people shared it. When I heard, I postponed our next visit by a week. Every part of me wanted more time with Elodie. Being her mother meant learning that my desire for closeness could not matter more than her sense of safety. At our next meeting, she asked whether she could come to the wedding. Callum and I looked at Nora and Daniel before answering. After another conversation with Dr. Naomi, we agreed Elodie could attend and could be the flower girl if she still wanted to. She could change her mind at any time. Daniel would stay close to an exit, and a quiet room would be available if she became overwhelmed. As I prepared to leave, Elodie stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my waist. The hug lasted only a few seconds. She did not call me Mom. I did not need her to. The next morning, Boston Children's Hospital asked me to attend an urgent compliance meeting. An anonymous complaint claimed I had used hospital access to locate an adopted child, harassed the Walsh family, and demonstrated emotional instability that made me unsafe around pediatric patients. The person who had tried to erase me from Elodie's life was now trying to erase the career I had built after losing her. Chapter 4. The Lie Followed Me to Work. The meeting was scheduled for 9 the next morning in a conference room 2 floors above the pediatric unit. Dana Whitfield, my nursing supervisor, sat at one end of the table. Martin Keene from compliance sat beside her with a laptop open and a printed copy of the complaint between them. Dana looked uncomfortable, but not accusing. "We received an anonymous report involving possible misuse of patient information," she said. "Because the allegation concerns a minor, we are required to investigate." My heart was pounding hard enough to make my hands feel numb, but I did not disappear into the wood grain of the table. I asked for the hospital policy in writing. I asked that my response be documented. I said I wanted my attorney included in any discussion involving the adoption or my personal records. Martin nodded. "That is reasonable. I also want the audit completed before anyone assumes I searched for Elodie through this hospital. We will review every access under your credentials," he said. The complaint accused me of using Boston Children's Hospital systems to locate an adopted child, contacting the Walsh family against their wishes, and behaving with enough emotional instability to make my work with pediatric families unsafe. The writer knew about the adoption. They knew I had recently met Elodie. They knew where I worked. Very few people knew all 3. Rebecca sent the documentation that afternoon, the timeline from the DNA platform, the letters between the attorneys, the statement that Callum and I were not challenging the adoption, written confirmation from Nora and Daniel that every meeting had been voluntary. Martin reviewed the access logs connected to my employee credentials. I had never searched Elodie's name. I had never searched Nora or Daniel. I had not accessed any record connected to Brookline Adoption Services or the Walsh family. Maya gave a statement confirming that I had never used hospital computers to research my daughter. She also reminded compliance that many of the early calls with Rebecca had happened while she was sitting beside me in my own car. The investigation still lasted several days. I was allowed to work, but I was temporarily removed from a family support committee until the review was complete. People noticed. 2 nurses stopped talking when I entered the break room. A resident who normally asked me for help avoided eye contact. I did not confront them. There were patients waiting. That afternoon, I cared for a 4-year-old boy recovering from surgery. His mother was 22 and looked terrified every time someone in a white coat entered the room. She apologized repeatedly for not understanding the discharge instructions. "I know how this looks," she said. "I'm trying." I pulled a chair beside her. "This hospital needs to know what happened and what you need now. It does not need rumors about what kind of mother someone thinks you are." The words settled between us. I realized I was speaking to both of us. 3 days later, Dana called me back upstairs. Martin closed the laptop before I sat down. "The complaint is unsubstantiated," he said. "The audit log showed no unauthorized access. The Walsh family statement directly contradicted the claim that I had harassed them. My committee position was restored." Dana leaned forward. "Your adoption history does not make you less qualified to care for families here. Using that history to attack your professional reputation is the more serious concern." Relief came slowly. I had not lost my job. But the complaint had proved Vivian was willing to reach into every part of my life if she believed fear might bring me back under her control. The hospital could not identify the sender with certainty. Martin confirmed the message came from a temporary account and had been sent through a public network in the Wellesley area. That was not proof. Neither was the language, even though it sounded painfully familiar. Emotionally unfit to make decisions involving children. 2 days later, Nora received a voicemail. She played it for Rebecca, then for me. Vivian's voice was calm and carefully concerned. "My name is Vivian Whitaker. I am Elodie's biological grandmother. I believe Ione is emotionally unfit and may have used her position at the hospital to obtain information. I am trying to protect your family before this becomes more disruptive." The language was almost identical to the complaint. Rebecca did not overstate what we had. "This strongly suggests Vivian was involved," she said. "It is not enough to make a criminal allegation. It is enough to establish a pattern and send a formal warning." She issued a cease and desist letter to both of my parents. They were instructed not to contact the Walsh family, my employer, or Elodie. They were warned not to publish private information or present themselves as having any right to access her. Rebecca explained the limits clearly. "This is not a restraining order. It creates a written boundary and a paper trail. If they continue, we document everything." Vivian responded by moving the fight somewhere she still believed she had power: Grace Community Church. She told several members that I was disrupting a stable adoption because I wanted to ease my guilt before the wedding. She said Nora and Daniel were being pressured. She described herself as a grandmother trying to protect a child from chaos. Ruth Carver did not accept the story quietly. "Did the Walshes ask you to intervene?" Vivian avoided the question. Ruth asked why the Walshes had confirmed that all contact was voluntary. Then she asked who had stopped the adoption updates years earlier. Vivian said outsiders could not understand complicated family decisions. Pastor Leah Morgan told her not to use church mailing lists or ministry events to circulate private information about a child. I refused to fight Vivian online. I sent one short statement to the people directly affected. Elodie was safe. Nora and Daniel remained her legal parents. Every meeting was voluntary and supported by a therapist. I would not discuss anything else because Elodie's privacy mattered more than my reputation. For a few days, the silence held. Then Vivian saw Callum and Elodie outside a music store in Brookline. Elodie was carrying her violin case and laughing at something Callum had said. Vivian recognized her immediately: the shape of her face, the dark hair, the eyes that looked too much like Callum's to dismiss. She followed their car for several blocks, but did not approach the Walsh house. The next morning, my parents appeared at my apartment without warning. Vivian entered before I invited her. "You are confusing that child," she said. "She knows who we are. She is 7. She cannot understand what you are doing." Graham stood near the doorway, already looking tired. Vivian changed tactics. "The Walshes may seem cooperative now, but they can change their minds. They could accuse you of interference. They could sue. They have an attorney, so do we." My mother's mouth tightened. "We will pay for the honeymoon. Europe, Hawaii, wherever you want. Wait until Elodie is 18. You tried to buy 7 more years of silence." I am trying to prevent another disaster. When bribery failed, she returned to the threat she had trusted for years. "Does Callum know you were not sure who the father was?" "He knows everything." Vivian did not believe me. That was why she invited us to dinner on March 14th. It was the dinner where this story began. Callum had just asked whether I believed he was not the father or whether my parents needed me to believe it. Then he continued, The independent test confirmed I am Elodie's biological father. Nora and Daniel opened contact voluntarily. Ione has never challenged the adoption. Elodie will attend our wedding if she remains comfortable. Vivian's composure finally cracked. We could not have known how you would react in 2017. Graham spoke before she could stop him. We couldn't let you show up and stop the placement after everything had been arranged. The room went silent. Callum looked at him. So you didn't believe I wasn't the father. You were afraid I was. Graham said nothing. After dinner, he asked me to step onto the porch. The March air was cold. He admitted he had seen the first 2 update packages from the Walsh family. He knew Vivian called the agency. He knew she told them I needed a clean break. I thought reopening everything would destroy the peace, he said. What peace? He looked back toward the house. If this becomes public, your mother could lose her position at church. Even then, he wanted me to protect her. Not Elodie, not myself, her reputation. I returned to the dining room and opened the wedding guest list on my phone. I removed both their names. You are not invited to the rehearsal dinner or the wedding. You will not contact Elodie, the Walshes, or my employer. Vivian stared at me. You cannot erase your parents from a wedding in front of the entire community. I'm not erasing you. I'm refusing to let you erase me. 2 weeks later at the welcome dinner at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, the doors opened before the first toast. Vivian and Graham walked in despite not being on the guest list. My mother carried a thick envelope and moved directly toward the microphone. At the same moment, the opposite doors opened. Elodie entered between Nora and Daniel, holding her violin case. Vivian saw her for the first time. The child she had turned into a secret was standing in front of the entire room with a name, a family, and a life my mother could no longer control. Chapter 5. The family they could no longer control. For several seconds, no one moved. Elodie stood between Nora and Daniel in a white dress with a purple sash, one hand wrapped around the handle of her violin case. She looked toward Callum first, then found me across the room. She smiled. Not dramatically, not like a child entering a story written for adults. She simply smiled because she recognized us. Then she walked to the table reserved near the side door and sat between the parents who had raised her. Vivian stared at her. I watched my mother search Elodie's face for a way to preserve the lie. She found my childhood in the shape of her cheeks and Callum in her eyes. For years, Vivian had relied on uncertainty. Elodie's presence removed it, without saying a word. Caroline Reed stepped between my parents and the center of the room. She told them they were not on the guest list and needed to leave. Vivian straightened. She said no one had the right to keep a mother from her only daughter's wedding. The hotel manager was already approaching, but Vivian moved faster. She reached the microphone before Caroline could stop her. The room quieted. Vivian said she wanted to correct a painful misunderstanding before our family was destroyed beyond repair. She claimed I was using the wedding to force myself into the life of a child who already had a stable home. She said parents sometimes made painful choices their children were too young to understand. She had sacrificed for me. She had protected my future. Now I was turning gratitude into revenge and dragging Elodie into chaos because I could not accept the consequences of my own decisions. The old pressure returned to my chest. For one breath, I was 20 again. Then Nora stood. She did not raise her voice. She said the Walsh family had not been harassed. They had responded to the DNA match voluntarily. Callum and I had never requested custody or challenged the adoption. Every meeting had been discussed with a therapist, and every boundary had been respected. Then Nora said the person who ended the letters years earlier had not been me. Vivian glanced toward Elodie and said a child should not be listening to this. Daniel immediately stood, took Elodie's hand, and led her toward the quiet room we had prepared. She looked back once, confused but not panicked. Nora stayed long enough to finish. She said I had never tried to take her place as Elodie's mother. Then she followed her family out of the room. My legs felt unsteady. Maya appeared beside me. She reminded me that I was not 20 anymore. I decided what happened next. I waited until Daniel texted Callum that Elodie was safe in the quiet room. Then I took the microphone from my mother. I did not open the envelope she carried. I did not read private medical records or therapy notes. I did not tell 40 people every detail of the worst day of my life. I gave them 3 facts. My parents used my email and phone to separate me from Callum. They threatened to withdraw my tuition, housing, transportation, medical support, and every other resource I depended on if I refused the adoption. Then, Vivian used my identity to stop the letters and photographs Nora and Daniel had sent through the agency. The records had been reviewed by attorneys and the agency. Graham stepped forward and said they had only been trying to protect my future. I looked at him. Whose future had they protected? Mine, Elodie's, or the perfect version of our family they wanted everyone in that room to believe? He had no answer. Vivian did. She said Elodie had been raised in a loving home and I should be grateful. I told her Elodie having loving parents did not make what she had done loving. Vivian insisted she had made the best decision for her daughter. I told her doing what was best for a child did not mean removing every choice and demanding gratitude for the damage. Ruth Carver stood near the back of the room. She did not claim to understand the law or the adoption records. She said Vivian had already been told not to use the church community to pressure Ione. Entering a private event without an invitation and publicly shaming her daughter was not protection. Pastor Leah agreed that the dinner was not an appropriate place to continue the conflict. Thomas Reed spoke only once. He said the room was for people who could celebrate Ione Callum and Elodie without trying to shame them. No one applauded. No one needed to. Caroline opened the door. The hotel manager waited beside her. Not one guest moved to stand with Vivian. My mother turned to Graham and told him they were leaving. He looked at me. For one moment, I thought he might stay. I thought he might finally choose the truth after 7 years of choosing silence. He followed her. That was his answer. I did not remain in the room to hear what anyone thought of my speech. I went directly to Elodie. She was sitting on a couch in the quiet room with Nora on one side and Daniel on the other. Her violin case rested against the wall. She looked at me carefully. She asked whether everything had happened because she came to the dinner. I knelt in front of her. I told her adults had made choices before she was born. Tonight, the adults who loved her had made sure those old choices could not hurt her again. She asked if Vivian was her grandmother. I said Vivian was biologically related to her. I also explained that biology did not automatically give someone permission to enter a child's life. Access had to come with safety, respect, and trust. No one asked Elodie to decide what Vivian meant to her. She was 7. That was not her burden. After a few minutes, Elodie decided she wanted to return to the dinner. She did not make a speech. She sat between Nora and Daniel and ate half a dinner roll while Callum's father tried to make her laugh. Margaret and Thomas gave her a new music box and a letter explaining that they hoped to know her at whatever pace felt comfortable. Before the night ended, Elodie handed me a card. She had written that it was for tomorrow and that she was glad she had found more people. The next day she stood at the entrance of Old South Church holding a small basket of flower petals. Vivian and Graham did not appear. There was no second confrontation. Before Elodie walked down the aisle, she looked at Nora and asked if she was all right. Nora told her she would be sitting in the front row and could not have been prouder. Watching Elodie walk ahead of me did not feel like someone had returned my child. She had never been an object anyone could return. It felt like the adults in her life had agreed she could belong to more people without losing the home she already had. Callum and I kept our vows simple. We promised to choose truth over comfort, safety over appearances, and honesty over the kind of peace that required someone else to remain silent. 1 week later, Rebecca sent a certified no-contact letter to my parents. It instructed them not to contact Callum or the Walsh family or Elodie. They were not to come to our homes, workplaces, or Elodie's school. Any further harassment or release of private information would be documented and could lead to additional legal action. It was not a restraining order. It was a boundary written clearly enough that no one could pretend not to understand it. Vivian did not respond. Graham sent a letter saying he wished things had happened differently. He did not say what he had done. He did not acknowledge the phone call, the letters, or the years he chose silence. I did not answer. Pastor Leah asked Vivian to step away from her volunteer leadership role while the church reviewed how she had used private information and member contacts. Some friends continued speaking to my parents. Their lives did not collapse. They were not arrested. They did not lose their home. Their consequence was simpler. They missed the wedding. They lost access to Elodie. They could no longer force me to protect their image. Most importantly, they no longer controlled the only version of the story anyone was allowed to hear. Elodie continued living with Nora and Daniel in Brookline. Our visits increased slowly. The four of us created a group message for violin lessons, school events, therapy appointments, dentist visits, and weekends. It was not perfect. Once, Elodie spent an afternoon at our apartment, then began crying because she missed Nora. I called her mother and drove her home early. I did not treat homesickness as rejection. Another time, Nora sent me a video from Elodie's first birthday. I watched it once and then cried in therapy because I could not bear to make Elodie responsible for comforting me over years she had no power to change. Months later, Elodie was doing homework at our kitchen table. Without looking up, she asked Mom Ione to help with a math problem. I froze. Then I sat beside her and said, "Of course." She still called Nora Mom. No one lost anything. One evening, Elodie practiced violin in our living room. On the mantel was the Polaroid Elena had hidden in my hospital bag, and a new photograph taken after Elodie's spring recital. In the new picture, she stood between Nora and me, with Daniel and Callum behind us. Elodie missed a note. She stopped, frowned, and began again. Then she called toward the kitchen and asked whether everyone was listening. We all answered yes. I could not recover the 7 years that had been taken from us, but I was no longer standing outside my daughter's life wondering who she had become. I was in the room. I could hear her miss a note, take a breath, and begin again, and no one would ever make either of us disappear from the other's story again. If you had been in my place, would you have ended contact with Vivian and Graham permanently? And do you believe Graham carried less responsibility simply because he usually chose silence instead of giving the orders himself? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay with the channel for more stories about family betrayal, accountability, and the moment silence finally ends.